All right, thank you so much, and the Rockland Library for hosting me. This is exciting because I live here in Rockland, so this is the first time I've been able to do a presentation in my community. So really, really happy to meet you all, neighbors, community members, and excited to talk more about climate action, your interests, your questions, hopes, dreams. And so, yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I have a lot of slides to go through, so I usually kind of run through those and then do discussion at the end. So after I share all the information, we have plenty of time to talk, and I'll answer your questions and maybe hear more about what's interesting to you, and if you have any thoughts, questions about specific climate action that you're thinking about in this community and in your circles. So that's how I think we'll do things, and without further ado, I will get started. So that was an intro for me. I am with the Maine Climate Council, which is an initiative of the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, also known as GOPIF. So the Maine Climate Council is a bipartisan assembly of state and local officials, as well as concerned citizens, nonprofit leaders, municipal officials, youth, and people that are involved in the state's economy at all different levels. And so the Climate Council is tasked with developing a plan every 4 years to take action on climate change. I have a couple of copies of the plan here. They are very thick. They take a long time to read, but you're welcome to take one. You're also welcome to read the digital version, which is on our website. This slide shows our two lovely co-chairs of the Maine Climate Council, Hannah Pingree from our office, and then Commissioner Loisem from the Department of Environmental Protection, who are our co-chairs that lead this work at the state level. So we're very lucky to have state leadership that is really driving this effort. I don't need to tell anybody here that Maine is already seeing climate impacts, warmer temperatures, all times of the year. We are seeing more precipitation. That is a general trend that you probably have noticed. More intense storms. Obviously, the storms of last year really hit this area hard. I mean, I remember being out there, walking out to the waterfront and seeing what was happening. It's pretty astounding. And then the inland areas, you know, I grew up in Bethel, which saw some really, really intense flooding in the December storm. So again, don't need to tell anybody, but climate change is already here. And we've seen that, you know, our scientific committee studies climate impacts in Maine, and the data is all there that indicators are accelerating on every level here in Maine and globally. So just a couple more pictures of storm damage. Again, this is not surprising to the folks in this room, I'm sure. We also know that we have opportunities to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and switch to cleaner energy sources that don't rely on fossil fuels. So in Maine, 80% of our carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels come from the transportation sector and the building sector. So those are the bulk of our emissions: residential buildings, commercial buildings, as well as industrial facilities, which also can count as buildings. But transportation is huge here in Maine. We're a rural state. People drive a lot. There's not a whole lot of public transportation options. So we do have significant challenges when it comes to reducing our emissions from transportation. Challenges and opportunities, as we'll talk about. So just a little bit of background on the Climate Council. In 2019, Governor Mills signed LD 1679, which established the Maine Climate Council and also set goals, set statutory targets for reducing emissions and becoming more resilient. So in our Maine statute, we have targets that the state has to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 45% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% by 2050. So that is in Maine law. The law also requires that the climate plan work to support resilience in Maine communities and then also foster economic opportunity and prosperity and equity. So just another law that you may be aware of, the legislature passed a law that requires we hit certain targets for renewable energy generation goals. That's called Maine's portfolio standard, renewable portfolio standard, sorry. So that's also in law. And then Governor Mills also signed an executive order requiring that we achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. So those are just some of the statutes and executive orders that the Climate Council works towards when we develop our 4-year climate action plan. So Climate Council is structured, there's a 39-member council, and then there are 6 working groups under that work to develop the strategies that the council considers. So buildings, transportation, and then the other ones that you see down at the bottom there. We also have a scientific and technical subcommittee that really works to ground our work in science. So they produce an assessment every 4 years of how climate change is impacting the state. And we also have an equity subcommittee that works to ensure that as we're putting the plan into practice, that the benefits of that plan are being shared among diverse populations, especially those that face greater barriers to participating in climate action. So Maine Won't Wait, as I mentioned, is our 2nd climate action plan. It was published just this November. It has 4 goals: reducing greenhouse gas emissions, building resilience to climate impacts, creating jobs, and then bringing climate action to all Maine people. And so those align pretty closely with our statutory requirements, and that's why those are the 4 goals in the plan. To develop the plan this time around, we talked to a lot of people. We had over 1,000 folks engaged over the course of about a year, really during the last calendar year. We had surveys going out. We talked to people through in-person events around the state. I was out tabling at the, whatever you call it, the rolling and riding day on Sundays when they shut down Main Street. So we went to a lot of community events like that and heard from people about what's top of mind for them. We also heard from Maine Youth. So we have a engagement coordinator who goes out to schools and talks with student groups about what they're thinking about. And then we also did work with the University of Maine Mitchell Center to hear from low-income and other underserved groups that maybe don't always participate in state government planning process. So we did make an effort to really get out and hear from those folks. So I will go into a little bit more detail on the strategies in the plan. There's a ton more detail that you'll get if you read the plan. So if there's something that you're like, oh, why is that not mentioned? It might be in the plan, and you can read more by digging in. But broadly, Maine Won't Wait has 7 strategies that cover the greatest opportunities to reduce emissions and ways that our state can become more resilient. So I'll go through some of the key areas from each of those strategies in the next few slides. And we also, as you'll note, that a lot of these points also have progress. So we try to be really transparent on how the state is doing towards meeting our goals. So we report on our electric vehicle numbers every year. We report on how many heat pumps have been installed so that folks can see how we're doing towards reaching the targets that the Climate Council sets. So jumping right into transportation, which, as I mentioned, is the greatest single source of emissions in the state. We have more than 17,000 electric vehicles registered in Maine. That is quite a few more than there were in 2020. There were only a little bit more than 4,000, but our goal is 150,000 by 2030. So a long way to go still. But again, we have made quite a bit of progress, and it will need to ramp up significantly in order to meet that goal. So this is something that requires sustained effort on the part of everybody in the state, and also something that's really, really crucial if we're going to take a chunk out of that 49% of emissions that come from cars and trucks. Expanding Maine's EV charging network. This was near and dear to my heart because I worked on this for a few years, but that is really one of the single most important ways that we can get more folks driving electric cars, is to have the charging infrastructure to support them. So the plan has a new goal of 700 new state-supported EV chargers by 2028. There's more than 1,000 now, so there are, again, more than there were in 2020, but they need to be more spread out throughout the state, especially in rural areas. There's a new charging station at Hannaford here in Rockland, which is exciting, but a lot more to go. Also very important to reduce the need for driving through alternative transportation options. So as you probably know, there's not a ton of public transit options here in Maine, especially in places like Mid-Coast Maine. So there are some specific actions in the plan to look at expanding those alternative transportation options. So bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Rockland, I think, has done a really good job of taking the first step to identify what the priority routes for walking and biking are. And I've been really excited to see Rockland taking that step, because I think more towns would really benefit from doing that. And then that's the first step to actually being able to build out and improve that infrastructure. Also, there are some pilot projects going on around getting folks to work with alternative transportation. So using e-bikes, using van pools, car pools, and some of these efforts are being supported by funding at the state level. So Maine DOT is doing some really exciting pilots, and it would be great to see those expanded. And then just education and awareness is always key. People don't always know what's available. You know, there is public transportation here in Rockland. I've never used it, but I recently learned about it. And so I think if more people knew what the options were, there would be more people using it, especially those folks that cannot drive or for whatever reason are not able to have their own personal vehicle. Another important piece of transportation is the resilience of transportation infrastructure. So making sure that our roads, bridges, culverts are prepared for extreme storms and flood events, so that when we build these new pieces of infrastructure, they are higher, they're built better to withstand extreme weather. So we've invested quite a bit of money in that so far through the Maine Infrastructure Adaptation Fund, and again, really crucial to see that continue. So moving on to buildings, again, this is another significant source of emissions after transportation. So 31% of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from buildings. Maine has become a significant leader around the country in the installation of heat pumps, and there are more than 143,000 installed in Maine. I think the recent number I saw was maybe around 170,000. So it's going up every day. Lots of people are installing heat pumps. And again, we do have pretty ambitious goals for the number of heat pumps, particularly those that are heating the entire home, not just one room, but really transitioning your entire home away from oil and gas and to use electric heat pumps. And then 40,000 of those heat pumps should be in low-income households to make sure that those folks are also getting the benefits. Weatherization, insulation is also really crucial to saving people money and making them more comfortable. So we have goals for weatherizing 35,000 homes by 2030, including 10,000, about a third of those in low-income households. Another important piece here is affordable housing. Again, don't need to tell anybody that affordable housing is a huge issue in every community in our state, and the Climate Council recognizes that there's an opportunity as we build more affordable housing to make sure that it's energy efficient and using clean energy where possible, and that also that we're able to retrofit old and leaky, drafty housing to become more energy efficient, because that also saves people money and makes them more comfortable. So the climate plan has a goal of 1,500 energy efficient affordable housing units per year, and that is significantly more than is currently being built or renovated. So again, another ambitious goal. We also have plans and initiatives to lead by example in publicly funded buildings, so schools, state buildings, municipal buildings. That's what we call lead by example. So the climate plan recommends reducing emissions from state buildings by 50% by 2034. This is actually a goal at the state level. The governor has signed an executive order. So we're working on that, and just recognizing that it's really important to do these things in visible public buildings so that people can see the impact and the benefits of these transitions to energy efficiency and clean energy. So moving on to our electricity sources, 55% approximately of Maine's electricity currently comes from renewable energy sources, and the requirement in statute, as I mentioned before, is 80% by 2030. The governor has also set a new goal of 100% clean electricity by 2040, so that's an additional goal on top of the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, that we already have in statute. The energy section of the plan really does focus on affordability and reliability of power for Mainers. This is something that we hear pretty frequently across the state, is that people are concerned about reliability of power and costs. So not surprising to any of you, but that is what the Climate Council really chose to focus on in this section. And actually the Governor's Energy Office just released a new state energy plan, I think yesterday, outlining how we can get to 100% clean electricity by 2040. So if you're interested in the really nitty-gritty of that, I would highly recommend checking that out. It's a really interesting plan and does lay out the case for how we can get there and do it in an affordable way that lowers people's energy costs over time. One of the important pieces of electricity is our grid. So this is a new concept in the plan called demand management, where in order to meet our growing electricity demands without overspending too much money on building the electrical grid, our experts are recommending modernizing the grid to use policies and technologies that are called demand management. So this really is just another word for saying helping to match electricity usage with supply. So it means something like shifting your electricity use away from what are called peak periods. So when everyone is using the grid at the same time, we call it a peak. And so there are ways that we can shift our usage to sort of flatten that demand so that it's not spiking up at certain times, such as right now it happens during summer afternoons when everybody turns their air conditioning on. So we can maybe, if you have an electric car, charging it a little later than you might have planned, or even something like turning on a dishwasher a little later. And demand management is just a way of sort of automating that or making it more easy for people to participate in that sort of activity. So lots of nerdy stuff to go into there, but it is a really important piece of building out the grid that we need in order to meet the growing demand. Another important goal around clean energy is growing the economic opportunity and jobs. So 30,000 clean energy jobs is our goal by 2030. We also set a new goal, the governor set a new goal of 7,000 new registered apprentices by 2030 to get people into those good jobs. Clean energy jobs are good and they pay well, and there are a lot of young people out there that might be looking into career opportunities. So registered apprentices are a good way to get folks into those fields. So now we're moving into some of the more natural resource and natural and working lands type recommendations. An important goal in the plan is protecting, conserving 30% of our natural and working lands in the state by 2030. Right now we're at about 22%. And the Climate Council recognized that in terms of conservation, farmland actually lags quite behind other types of conservation. And in order to protect and preserve our food supply in the state, it's important to increase the amount of farmland that's conserved. So they set a new goal to double permanently protected farmland by 2030, in addition to that 30% overall goal. And this feeds into the next goal of consuming more locally grown and made food by in-state food producers by 2030, so another 30% by 2030 goal. We don't know exactly where we are on this. This is really hard to measure, but there is a group that's working on coming up with an estimate for how much local food we are consuming right now. It's definitely below 30%, but we don't know exactly where we are. So this is one that's near and dear to Representative Ray's heart here, waste and materials management. This is new to the climate plan. Last time we had a plan, we didn't get much into waste. It's a pretty small amount of our emissions in the state overall, but it is really important to resilience, and communities are dealing with waste issues all the time. It's really top of mind for municipalities and for people that care about waste and making use of our resources. So the Climate Council set a goal to reduce food loss and waste 50% by 2030. That's pretty huge. There's a new food loss and waste study out from the Department of Environmental Protection that talks more about where that food waste is coming from. So if you're interested in knowing where food waste in Maine is coming from, that's a really interesting report to dig into.
Is that food and waste like separate liquid? That looks like plastic.
The picture is plastic. The goal is just food loss, just food. But there are other strategies in the plan that talk about overall materials management and waste. So as I mentioned earlier, well, I don't think I mentioned this yet, but natural resource industries are facing challenges in responding to climate change, particularly the farming, forestry, and fisheries industries. Climate really impacts their day-to-day lives and their industries, so especially those that are heavily reliant on one species, like lobster, or one thing like timber harvesting. So supporting these communities is really about making sure that our ecosystems are protected and resilient, and also helping folks to take advantage of new opportunities as they come online. So we think that there are some emerging opportunities that might arise from either the changing climate or the way that we're responding to climate change. So for instance, there are a number of wood products, new types of wood products that are being produced in the state, like wood fiber insulation, which can take and sequester carbon from the atmosphere and hold it for a long time so that it's not being emitted into the atmosphere and causing climate change. So that's an example of a new emerging product that is maybe an opportunity for communities that might have been more reliant on just regular timber harvesting before. There are also some emerging and maybe underutilized species in the Gulf of Maine, so in the oceans, that maybe communities that are reliant on current types of fishing like lobster could be taking more advantage of those opportunities. So this next section is on community resilience. So we know that there's been, as I mentioned, significant climate impacts in the last couple of years, particularly related to storms, but also related to extreme heat and other climate-related events. And communities continue to really need funding and support to address these issues. So over the past few years, since 2020, there have been significant state and federal investments in resilience in Maine communities. We track these, both what's coming in from the federal level and then also what's coming from various state sources. So far, 39% of those investments have gone to what are called underserved, or you might have heard disadvantaged, underrepresented communities. That really tends to be our rural communities in the state. So we have a goal of 40% of those investments going to those communities, so we're pretty close to the goal. But again, we are tracking this to see where the money is going, make sure it's not just going to the wealthier and more resource communities in the state. One specific program that helps communities with resilience is the Community Resilience Partnership. That's out of our office. We offer grants to communities to really take actions that align with their priorities. So there's a huge list that they can choose from. I mentioned the bike and pedestrian study in Rockland that was funded by the Community Resilience Partnership. So it really does give a wide range of options for communities to choose a project that fits their needs. And it has communities go through a vulnerability or a needs assessment. So looking at what are we doing well, what are the needs and opportunities. So there's currently 219 communities enrolled in the partnership. The governor set a goal of 200 communities back a couple months ago, and we just surpassed that. So it's exciting, and it's a really good way, I think, to get communities and specifically the more rural areas of the state talking about resilience and what do we need to do to meet all of our goals and needs. Okay, so one more on resilience. Protecting working waterfront infrastructure, super important, as you know, in communities like Rockland. So the council recommended a statewide working waterfront strategy to get a little bit more in depth on what these communities actually need. Working waterfront funding to really protect and preserve the infrastructure that working waterfront businesses and communities rely on. And then planning and zoning support for those sort of land use challenges that are unique to working waterfronts, where you're really kind of sandwiched in between sea level rise and development, gentrification, really significant challenges that are pretty unique to working waterfronts. So hopefully that working waterfront strategy will get into depth on a lot of those issues. So finally, the climate plan recommends continuing to do outreach and education to all Maine people. So this is what we're doing now. We're getting together and talking about what's in the plan and then what communities and individuals can do. So we really, our office does a lot of this. We go out and talk to folks, but also other state agencies are really tasked with going out and making sure that they're communicating about these strategies to their communities. Another aspect of the strategy around communication is supporting these sort of peer-to-peer coaching programs. Like, how are we, you all are here because you're super interested, but you probably have neighbors that you could go back and talk to about weatherizing their home or transportation options. So for every group of people that we get in a room, those people have social networks that they could be talking to. And I think especially for folks that want to take action and want to do something good for their community, that is a really, really helpful way that people can use their time and expertise. So we're thinking about how to support groups of people that want to do that sort of thing. And then finally, continuing to engage with Maine youth. So we have a youth climate leadership summit coming up in April. If you have high schoolers in your lives that you think might want to be part of a statewide movement of young people on climate action, get in touch, because we love to talk to school groups and other young folks. So that gets through all the strategies. We have a website, maine.gov/climateplan. You can read the plan, you can read stories on folks that have taken action on any number of these strategies. We have a newsletter that goes out periodically, and you can read the plan. So I'm sure we can get these slides out to all of you so that you can click on the links and go in and learn more. That's our website. And then just finally, we do have another page that's specific to young people. So if you know people that are young and interested in being involved, going to the summit, that's also on our website. Okay, that is most of what I have. I think I would love to take your questions, and then if there are specific areas where you want to talk about, what can we do to support the actions in the plan, I do have some more slides that get into that, or we can just have an open discussion about what's on your minds. But I would love to know what questions are coming up for you. And then, yeah, questions, comments, concerns, all of the above. So thank you.
Thank you. Do I have to stand?
No.
My son is very much concerned about our oil, and we're hoping to get heat pumps this year. However, I've been looking into the price and what we're getting back in moderate income, and it's really not enough. So even though the governor has this plan, we have to figure out how we can help people. And I'm certainly not at the lowest income, but we're somewhere in the middle. The other concern I have is about CMP. He was looking over where we're getting our sources, and they are not good. We'd have to pay a bunch more to get renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, he's concerned about the fossil use.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered what is out there to help us navigate this.
Yeah. Yeah, great questions / comments. So on the second one, with energy sources, we're at 55% renewable. So that applies to if you're getting your power from CMP, that everybody in the state is at the same level. It doesn't differ depending on where you are located. So 55% of our electricity is coming from renewable resources right now, and the statute requires that by 2030, 80% is coming from renewables. So that is applicable no matter where you are. There are options where you can sign up to get fully renewable electricity. It is more expensive. So most people are just on the standard rate, and it's 55%. So that's the official answer. The question about heat pumps, well, it was more of a comment that it's still expensive to install heat pumps even with the incentives that we have. So yes, it is costly. It's just a money challenge. So there are also currently federal tax credits out there that some folks might qualify for depending on if you have tax liability, but obviously that depends on your personal situation. And then there are, for the lower income folks, as you mentioned, there are significant programs out there either through Maine Housing or Efficiency Maine has quite higher rebates for low income. So, but yes, the moderate income is, you can be sort of challenging if you're in the middle there. Yeah.
It's pretty obvious you're not going to make the goals for vehicle electrification without getting a lot of fleets. How about the school buses?
Yeah, so school buses we are working on that. There have been a number of schools that have received funding through the EPA Clean School Bus Program to get electric buses. So there are a number of school buses out there in the state that are operating. They seem to be doing well. There have been some delays with actually getting the buses on the road because they're a little bit of a newer technology than light duty vehicles. So I would say it's an important sector to be looking at, but also to get those numbers, we need the light duty cars. So fleets, absolutely. Municipal vehicles, we're working on state vehicles. It is a challenge. So yes, all of the above, and businesses as well, because there's a financial case to be made for saving money and driving electric. So I think it's all of the above.
How much does the federal Inflation Reduction Act funding interact with our goals, and is it threatened? I mean, if it's threatened, are our goals at all threatened?
Yeah, so first, I would say that when we created the state's first climate action plan in 2020, there was no Inflation Reduction Act. There was some minimal tax credits. There was some stuff for electric vehicles, but I would say it wasn't super helpful. So the first climate action plan was established with none of that. So we are, at least now, in a better place than we were. It just helps. I mean, there are now tax credits for EVs that were not there before. There are still a lot of vehicles that are not eligible for that tax credit, so I would not say that the IRA is perfect in any way. There's, it's only for cars that are made in the US. The batteries have to be manufactured in the US. So even that tax credit had a lot of challenges. So that in itself is not going to get us all the way there, but it certainly helps. And we've looked at it. It is important to have those incentives in place. And in terms of what we're looking at for the future, we don't know yet. We're still waiting to hear how the federal action is going to impact those incentives, but they're certainly helpful, and it just takes a little bit of pressure off of the state and the ratepayers and the folks that might be asked to pay for this. So it's helpful to have federal incentives, but the state of Maine, the governor, we're still committed to these goals regardless of federal action.
Definitely a related question to that and sort of a follow-up. I'm thinking the solar panels. And there's community solar farms being built around the state. And I know I hear some pushback on that of clearing land and putting up solar panels, and I know you can do some agriculture with them. And I also remember hearing a study a while ago, somebody just looking at aerial photos of the state and figuring out how much electricity we could produce if we put panels on all these buildings in the state. And it was something like, if we put panels on half the buildings of the state, we could power the state, something like that. So I'm just wondering, following up on, with uncertainty at the federal level, has there been talk yet at the state level of something to assist homeowners and building owners to be able to afford panels on their buildings?
Yeah, yes, great question. There is a new program that's coming to Maine called Solar for All. It is federally funded, so it's not coming from state funding, but it's funding that we have received, and that will be going towards installing solar panels on homes for low and moderate income homeowners, and then also for funding community solar projects that people who qualify as low and moderate income can participate in. So that's what's first in the foreseeable future coming to Maine. But in terms of something that is more sustaining, I'm sure that will last for a couple of years and then there won't be anything. So there would need to be something beyond that one program to ensure that solar is accessible to all. But that will be a good start for sure.
I have a friend who decided that she wanted to get involved in the new, like the energy transition by becoming an electrician. And the problem was that to become an apprentice, she has to pass Algebra 2 or something like that. And so she's like been struggling for like the last year and a half trying to do Algebra 2. And I'm just wondering if there's anywhere that they've discussed like having some give in that.
It's a good question. I'm not an electrician, but that stuff is hard. Like this, you have to be really good at math to be an electrician. So I think, to me, whenever I read that stuff, it's more than Algebra 2 level. So, but there are clean energy jobs that don't require that. So there's weatherization technicians, there's energy auditors, it's not just electricians, although that's really a need. But I think actually the sort of weatherization and home performance workforce is one of the most lacking right now. And so there's, all levels, but yeah, being an electrician is really hard. I admire everyone who can do that.
I want to follow on the question about the solar panels on buildings. Is there anything being done to incentivize commercial buildings with huge parking lots and huge roof surfaces to install solar, either through subsidies or through reductions in taxes or whatever it might be?
Yeah, it's primarily the federal tax credit right now, so the 30% tax credit on clean energy sources. So that is a significant tax credit. It's been in place for a while. Hopefully it will stay in place, but that's what we're working with right now.
Not to take away at all from all the wonderful work that you've done, that you've talked about tonight, but I'm concerned about climate change, concerned about waste disposal, decreasing water supplies, decreasing fish populations, decreasing mineral supplies. All of these, in my opinion, are just symptoms of the main problem, which is the population of the world. It is probably more than the world can stand. And I don't know how well it would work if our friends in California with all their fires squirted the water on the smoke as opposed to the flames. So I'm really concerned that nobody's mentioning the really underlying problem of all these issues that we're facing now, one of which you're addressing, but I wish there was more talk about the underlying problem.
What is the state doing to increase public transportation? I know it's easy for us to get a bus to head south or to Bangor along the coast, but suppose we want to go to Augusta. I'd like to just jump on a bus and go to Augusta for the day.
I know, I would too.
There's no east-west
Yeah, I
at all.
agree.
Is anything being done to address that?
Yeah, I would say there have been some expansions of public transit in the last couple of years, mostly pilots. There's a new bus from Lewiston, Auburn to Portland. So previously there was no public transit from Lewiston to Portland. I'm not aware of anything from Rockland to Augusta, but I would absolutely love that for my commute. Yeah, so it's absolutely lacking. It's just finding the funding, and hopefully our representatives and senators will take note and think about that. And we have one in this room who's done a lot of great work on the transportation side. So definitely needs more work for sure.
I read that our new state ferry going to Islesboro is an electric vehicle.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And when will that be put into use?
I don't know.
I think it's 2026.
26.
Yeah.
Okay.
It hasn't been built.
Yeah.
It's been engineered.
Yeah.
designed up.
It's a short trip. I mean,
Yeah, no, that will be great. And
not a very long ferry ride.
yeah, DOT has been really pushing on electrifying transit, ferries, buses. So that's another piece of the pie, is expanding it, but also making sure that those vehicles are running on clean sources. Yeah.
A couple of things. One, we've been a hybrid family since 2011. And nobody really talks about that. I know we're talking electric, but it's expensive, and not everybody has the ability to plug in their cars at home. And like you said, they're still working on that. We have saved so much on gasoline since we started. We are on our third hybrid. And nobody talks about that. I'm not saying it's perfect, but we made a huge trip to Canada and Northern Ontario, and we probably used, I don't know, our bill for gasoline was very low, and prices in Canada are very high. So I think we cut it right down the middle. And the other thing, my son is always experimenting with solar. And the other day, something I didn't know he bought, but he bought some solar panels, small ones, that you can use and aim it toward the south in your home or outside. And it actually the numbers started going up. I didn't even know about this because our house is not good for solar because our house does not face south. And so that's another consideration. But we have a friend who just completed and is now on the grid and did a lot of work himself, but he is now hooked. His house is solar. And you get points, but it's cost a small fortune to what he did. So I think we have a long way to go, but I think if everybody tries a little harder to use less gas, put your foot off the brake, don't push it when you're going to stop at a light. My son has taught me amazingly how to conserve the gasoline that you use. And I think we all need to be educated. My other concern is on January 20th, what has happened in this country. I am very, very worried about how this is going to affect the money that we've gotten in the past to help this program because they don't believe in climate change or just pretend it's not there. So these are all things to ponder, think about this year.
Great, thanks so much.
Back to the subject of legislation and if we want to advocate in some way, is there legislation that we can begin to track or that will be coming or that we need to have introduced?
So I do not know comprehensively all of what's coming. I would recommend talking to your senators and representatives about that. There are also organizations that are, advocacy organizations that track that. So any number of those would, each organization has their own priorities, but there are some that come up again and again. So, there are other folks that are doing that, but the Climate Council itself doesn't make specific recommendations on legislation, we're from the governor's office, but there will be things that are coming. So I would say Yep.
Well, there we go. Just curious if the new apartment building on the corner of, what is it?
Maverick Street.
Maverick and whatever, yeah. If there was any new efficiency aspects to that whole permitting or construction.
Yeah, I don't know about that one specifically. Maine Housing, which finances a lot of the affordable housing in the state, are now required to build to very strict energy efficiency standards. It's almost passive house standards. So any of the new buildings that are funded by Maine Housing are using those standards, but I don't know the specific situation with that development.
Did you say you had some action slides for us?
Sure.
So that we don't get too morose?
Yeah. Yeah, I would be curious to know, is there one particular topic like that you're interested in talking more about? Because I could go through all of them, but it will just be a ton of slides. So, okay, I can see what we've got. Yeah.
Thanks, Em. I'm surprised that there's nothing about planting trees. I mean, I know people will say, oh, Maine has 1 million trees, but not in towns where we need to cut down on the heat island effect.
Yes.
Like Rockland, you know, everyone knows that Rockland has a sea of asphalt downtown. Behind the trade winds, for example, all that is all, we need to be getting rid of some of that pavement and making more tree islands. And I actually work with kids in the summer at the South School, and we always plant trees during the summer camp that I've raised from seed.
Awesome.
But I mean, there would be, I think that should be part of the climate action plan. It should be explicitly stated.
It is in the plan. Yep.
Okay, well, you didn't mention it.
Yes, I didn't mention it. It's in strategy, I want to say F in the resilient communities section. So there is a number of actions around making communities more resilient. So tree planting to reduce urban heat islands, establishing emergency warming and cooling centers, which yes, we do have here, which is great. Public health monitoring. There's so much that we didn't get into, but yeah, strategy F is where you'll find that. Yeah. Sorry about that. Quick switching. I'm just trying to find. Okay, so the food waste is under environment and natural and working lands and waters. So I guess we don't have a ton, I didn't write down a lot around food waste here, but certainly around local food, there are programs to help people use their food assistance benefits on local food, which is really, really helpful to reduce the barriers to more local food. Businesses can look at targets to source local food, implementing composting at facilities and events. So this is really important. If you look at that food loss and waste study, obviously a lot of our waste is coming from institutions. So schools, this is a big within schools. A lot of students are really, really passionate about food waste. And so we've been working with local students in schools that want to implement their own waste projects in schools. So that's where that shows up. Other topics that you want to talk about local actions on?
So on food waste in schools, yeah, a lot of kids are passionate about this, but a lot of kids get the apple from the cafeteria and throw it in the trash. And the school's not allowed to pull it back out and use it again because it's been touched by, I guess they have cooties or something. So I don't know if you can, if your purview involves changing regulations to make things work better. But if it does, you might consider that one.
Yeah, that's a great point. There is actually a law in Maine which previously there were rules around what food you can donate and what you can't donate. So for instance, if it's been open, if it's been touched. So there are now protections for organizations that wish to donate food. So if you're donating food to people that need it, you have more protection so that you can't be liable for things that might occur, you know, uncommon and unlikely. But so there are more protections for donating food these days. That was a recently passed law, which is great. Lena. Oh, somebody else.
I actually work in a high school, and I don't work in the cafeteria, but some of the students have mentioned that they do have like a place to put like, the apple they don't want, and then somebody else can take it. So I'm sure there's still a lot of food waste. But which one? Rockland, Oceanside. So they're like working to like help share within that lunch block. Like they say they don't want their yogurt or they don't want their apple, but they're required to like take a full meal when Yeah. Mhm. But then, like, the items that they don't want, they can share with, like, I don't know, classmate who wants the second apple.
Is there something in the plan that's about how what the timeline is for our actions? So there's all these overwhelming number of actions, and then the state is doing something, but then there's this long list for us and as individuals or as businesses or as communities. So is there something in the plan that's like, in 2025, we want the following actions to happen?
Mhm. Yeah, that would be something that I think towns can do as they participate in the Community Resilience Partnership. So one of the activities that they do first is to look at this checklist of actions and say, what have we done, what haven't we done, and then prioritize a list of actions. So that is happening on the town level for towns that are participating in the partnership. It's required of them before they're eligible for grants to really prioritize. So I think it's really hard to tell every community to do it in the same way, just because, we're a local controlled state. There's so much that is under the jurisdiction of the town level. And so it's really important to allow, communities flexibility to do what makes sense for them. So I think, the best way to go about it is to have communities do that exercise of planning. What makes sense for us right now? What's our sort of near-term and longer-term priority? But it's a good question. We have targets that have time limits on them, so we know what has to happen by 2030 and 2050, but it really is going to be different for each community.
Can you show the actions for housing?
Yeah. And I should say, these are not exhaustive at all. These are just examples that we came up with. We've got a number of things that folks can think about for your homes. Some of them are quite low cost. Window dressers, I'm sure many of you have window inserts or volunteer, participate in window dressers. But then there are also things that cost a little bit more money and will also save more money. Does everybody know what Efficiency Maine is? Yes, if you're not familiar with Efficiency Maine, that is where a lot of the rebates and incentives for energy efficiency, things like heat pumps and weatherization, are coming from. So when you install a heat pump in your house in Maine, you get a rebate that comes from Efficiency Maine. Sometimes the person that installs it will give you the rebate. They'll pass it through and they'll reduce your bill, and sometimes it will be a rebate that arrives in the mail from Efficiency Maine. So it's a quasi-state agency that administers the funding for these programs. And they have a installer list, so you work with a registered installer or vendor to install the widget or do the weatherization, and they're certified. They are trained to certain standards to do those installations. So that's what Efficiency Maine is. That's where the money typically comes from within the state of Maine. It's not tax credits, it's rebates. It's either cash or an instant discount on the technology that you're buying. Sometimes, yeah. There are other agencies that use federal funding. Like our office handles federal funding for municipalities. The governor's energy office has programs, so it's not always them, but a lot of the federal funding that has come in for home energy efficiency also will appear through Efficiency Maine's programs. It's a good point. I think you had a question about housing. I didn't write down much specifically about housing, but is there a particular question that you had about like how communities can encourage housing, or, is there something in particular that you're wondering about?
No, not really. I was wondering what you had, actually more for for the homeowners.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's pretty
Great.
much the list, the basic list. I wondered if maybe you had something I hadn't thought of yet.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
there
great.
are other things that, in addition to heat pumps, heat pump water heaters are pretty popular for if you want to switch away from propane or whatever you're using to heat right now. You can get instant discounts on those at like Lowe's and Home Depot. So they're quite affordable if you're looking to replace your water heater. Getting other electric appliances, if you're replacing a stove, maybe going with an induction stove, that's also an option. There are lots of things that you can do, but really it's the big ticket items are the heating system and the weatherization and the water heating.
You haven't mentioned a thing about those of us that love to burn wood in our wood stoves. How
Yes.
much pollution are we creating? And are you advocating that we stop burning wood? Because you know there's a lot of Mainers that burn wood.
Yeah,
And when the power goes out, comes in awful handy,
yeah,
because the power does go out.
yes.
I can still cook and I can still stay warm, but there's many of people in my neighborhood that cannot.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So you're not
yeah.
advocating I give up my wood stove, are you?
I personally am not. I have a wood stove. It mostly heats my home. It is not great for emissions and it's not great
Right.
for our health. So
Well, what's Hannah have to say about it? She have a wood stove out there on North Haven?
I don't know,
I
actually.
bet she does.
Yeah.
And so does her mother, I bet.
Yeah, electric heat is going to be the cleanest source for sure, but it's not always, but folks are all over the state. Yeah. Right, yeah, for comfort and also for backup heat, I think people are probably not going to give up their stoves, but it is something to think about. The more of us that switch to more electric heat, the fewer emissions will be. And it's also easier. I mean, for people that don't like lugging wood or loading their stove, you don't have to worry about that with the heat pump. So something to consider if you want your life to be a little bit easier.
I mean, like overall, like we shouldn't like just get obsessed with what we do as individuals, because what we do as individuals working together is the most important thing. We're trying to shift like our whole society off of fossil fuels, not you know, like just make it a new era of moving to renewables. And you know, wood is a renewable too. You know, no, not great for the atmosphere, but your little teeny wood stove is not the issue. It's our entire world's systems now and our addiction to fossil fuels.
Right, but for the next 4 years, it's going to be drill, baby, drill, because President Trump doesn't care about climate change.
Right,
and
but the economics of
he wants more oil.
I know,
You
yeah,
heard
but
him,
the
didn't you?
economics of
Oil,
solar
oil, oil.
are in our favor.
So for the next 4 years, we're
About
we're
any
doomed.
administration, we
We're
can say,
doomed.
we were here before he got here, and he will be here after he's.
Thank you.
Right.
But we do what's the
Do
right
what we
thing.
can, do what we can, while we can.
We also never talk about renters. I'm a renter. I don't have any control over what's in the place that I rent. Right now, it's 2 Renais. And actually, they're not as good as when we had oil heat and we had all the old radiators. It was much better. It's much colder with the Renais and the air is blowing all the time. So anyway, I think we need to consider, you know, when you talk about low income, we need to mention renters too. And I also don't drive.
Mhm.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
I've never had a driver's license.
Yeah,
And, you know, Rockland is not safe for biking. I don't care if there are bike icons on the street, it's extremely dangerous. There are no bike lanes.
yeah.
You know, you're supposed to compete with the drivers of cars, and there's a lot of crazy drivers that rev down Main Street even,
Mhm.
as we all know.
Yeah.
So I think it's great that we've had a bike study, but there's going to have to be a lot of changes before it's safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and great point about renters. We work a lot with landlords, particularly of low-income housing, on doing, because the landlords are the ones that make the decisions, right? When I'm a renter, you can badger your landlord all you want, but they really are the ones that hold the pocketbook and make the decision. So yeah, so that is why we do a lot of our advocacy, and Efficiency Maine does a lot of their work with landlords so that they know about the incentives and are able to take advantage of that.
just wanted to drop a comment or two in.
Yeah.
Firstly, thank you both for the work that you're doing in the systems that exist. And then secondly, to the previous comment about how do we make this change and how do we reach out to our legislators. My name's Nate, and I'm in a newly created role. I'm in week 3 working for the Natural Resources Council of Maine. And if you want to find a sense of community and support in reaching out to your legislators, I'd be happy to talk to you about that afterwards.
Great. Yep, you guys do great work, so. Yep.
This is too easy. Hi there. Molly, I've got a question. On some of these actions, I'm wondering how closely GOPIF is tied in with municipalities and getting their assistance. Because a lot of questions here could be funneled through the towns in which people live and get back.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, you have that built in, but I'm wondering if you talk about it.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So that was why the Community Resilience Partnership was started in 2021. It was a result of the first climate action plan because we recognized, or the council recognized that, like you said, a lot of this is in the hands of the municipalities. And so we needed a way to support municipalities to make these actions happen. So the current vehicle for doing that is the partnership, which funds resilience and then also sort of energy transition related projects at the town level. And so we do communicate a lot with municipalities, both directly through the partnership, but also through the service providers. So there's, we fund local organizations and planning organizations that then do the more on the ground work of helping municipalities in the day-to-day. So if they're trying to apply for a federal grant, which is a huge lift for a small town that has limited capacity, the service providers help them every step of the way. So it's not just with our program, but they also assist them with finding other sources of funding. So those service providers are really key, and the regional planning organizations do a lot of that as well. And then just one other piece to mention that is exciting, there's a new state office coming online soon, as soon as the legislature appropriates the funds to move it over. It's called the Maine Office of Community Affairs, and it's basically there used to be a state planning office, some of you might know, that was removed, and then this office is a little bit of a reincarnation of that. It's going to be bringing existing state programs that are currently dispersed out into a bunch of different state agencies under one umbrella. So the Maine Coastal Program, the Municipal Planning Assistance Program, the Building Codes and Standards Program will now be housed under a new office that's really focused on community assistance and support. There's going to be a resilience office within that office, so any program that's related to climate resilience will now be housed in one single office. So instead of going to 3 different agencies for help with an issue, towns can now go to MOCA, the Maine Office of Community Affairs, and that hopefully will be happening later this year. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
I just wonder which communities around us, like Knox County, have organizations,
Yeah, you mean like local climate action committees? Yeah, we do not have a, I guess, directory of them, but we do have on the Community Resilience Partnership website, you can see a map of the towns that are enrolled in the partnership. And so if the town is enrolled, then they at least have a group that has convened to do those sort of planning exercises. So sometimes it's a resilience committee, sometimes it's a sustainability committee or climate action committee. So chances are, if they're in the partnership, there is a group of people that are continuously working on this issue. Yeah, Camden has one, Rockland. I believe most of the mid-coast towns up and down here are involved. There's a few that aren't, but a lot of them are. Do you have a question?
Well, it's actually something to tell the folks here. I'm very involved in politics and all kinds of things going on. I know that late February, I believe it's February 26th, in Augusta at the State House is going to be Meet Your Legislator Day. And I think that if people are concerned then need to address certain issues, it would be great, people can carpool to go up there, but I think it's important that we meet with them and also write letters, anything to just get things moving in the right direction and keep them there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's a great idea. Meet your legislators. We have some great ones right here locally, so. Other questions, comments, events that are coming up, groups that you want to get folks involved in? I really like hearing about what's happening.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. And meeting legislators in Augusta is great, but what might be even better or more fruitful, not that I don't want you to come see me, for example, but is going to your town office, going to your town council meetings or your select board meetings, and trying to get them taking fully advantage of the regional planning arrangements they've made. The Mid-Coast Council of Governments, for example, Rockland is part of that. Everybody who lives in Rockland is paying dues to that. And there's some really good studies that this group is doing. But their studies are going to be a heck of a lot more informed if you get on your town council and say, I would like to be a representative to, or I want more engagement with the Mid-Coast Council of Government working on transportation issues, for example. It's just one more way to get in touch with your government.
I think that might be it for questions. So I want to say thank you to everyone for joining tonight. And thanks again to Molly for her wonderful work tonight. Excellent. Thank you so much.